When I'm in Japan, one of the things I try to do is play arcade games that I won't have access to in the US. And one of the most common genres for me to do that for is, I guess what you would call collectible card games. So these are games in the arcades that are kind of based around the fact that you kind of keep a collection of cards and you utilize those cards in the arcade. This kind of comes in a variety of, ways of how you use them. They can be for fashion rhythm games where you dress up your characters with cards. There's like this game called like Dragon Ball Heroes, which I haven't played, but you get different Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball characters on cards. And then even in the US, we actually have a few of these, like Minecraft Dungeons, and there's like I think an Injustice game, but they're just not super common for a variety of reasons here, especially the Japanese games in particular. So when I was visiting Japan this last time, I decided to play Dragon Quest: The Adventure of Dai Xross Blade, which is a game in that collectible card genre. That is a part of the Dragon Quest series, but also is a part of the anime recent revitalization. There's like a few different games they released in this regard, and Xross Blade, it seems to be so far, well, out of the two that have released so far, the one that has been the most successful. But before I get too deep into like my thoughts and things on this game, I just want to say, unfortunately, I did not get to spend nearly as much time with this game when I was in Japan as I would like to. So I think a lot of my things I'm going to talk about here are going to be A, my experiences, B, my impressions, and then also C, it's going to be fairly shallow, and I'm going to be doing a little bit of speculation on just like what is a possibility in this game, but I don't know 100% sure, how in depth I really can take this conversation. I did spend like $50 or $60 playing the game, but just it has pretty high demands as like a ongoing live service game kind of thing. The other thing is that I never found a machine that had direct video capture as an option. So I didn't really plan to make this video at first, but I did end up kind of recording off-screen footage of this game. And I did not bring any equipment or anything like that to stabilize or record any audio directly. So it's going to be kind of a messy video, I will say that, just as a heads up. But we'll have some generic Dragon Quest music in here because otherwise you'll just hear the general noise of like the arcade in the background. So when you first kind of play Dragon Quest Xross Blades, your experience is more or less just putting 100 yen in and the game immediately spits a card out at you. I don't know if it's like a set card that they have or it's just a randomized card, but every play afterwards is just a randomized card. And what the game will ask you to do is basically put this card on a table. And what this does is it spawns that card or the enemy character on that card, the little monster on that card, in the game itself. And so as you play the game, you get more and more cards, and typically you kind of want to have at least 3 before you get into any kind of like major content, because the game typically is based around 3-on-3 battles. There may be sometimes some reserved slots in certain missions where they want you to put an extra card down just in case, but otherwise 3-on-3 is the rule of the roads here, basically. And all these battles, more or less on the surface level, kind of look the same. It's like kind of these big empty arenas with different backgrounds and things like that. So where the game kind of relies in terms of keeping things fresh and having a variety of things is that it really relies on character placement and positioning. But it's not just like a standard kind of, one-on-one RPG where nobody moves or anything like that. That card essentially acts as the way you move your character. So if you want to move your character to a position on the map, you move the card on the table to another position. This is really important because basically with each card you place on the table, they have like a little symbol that kind of floats around them. And this symbol essentially represents that card's attack field. And that attack field is different depending on the card itself a lot of times. And as far as I can tell, I think most of them are fairly unique to each monster. But these different shapes basically can be, fairly uniform of like just hitting everything in front of the character, things all around the character, and things like that. But the key goal with this field is to essentially try to get as many enemies within this field as possible. So you want to try to hit all 3 enemies on the field all at once if you can, and try to do that with as many characters as you can, because if you can do that, once you go into the attack phase, you'll essentially be doing, the maximum amount of damage you possibly can do against an enemy. And then the enemies, at the same time, also have that same kind of responsibility on their side to try to get as many of your characters into their own attack fields. And the AI is kind of okay at doing this. Sometimes it's effective, sometimes it's not. But the really big thing is just to make sure you're spreading your characters out, even though you're kind of trying to, hit all the same enemies with them at the same time. And so when you get into the attack phase, it's not just like, just sitting there and waiting to see what happens. I think this is true of a lot of kind of like these kids RPG games that are card based, where like they really want you to mash the button a ton. So when you get into fight, they basically ask you to keep mashing the button during an attack phase, and at the end of the attack phase, they also have kind of like a time button press you do to do like a critical hit at the end if you get a perfect timing kind of thing. And then on the defensive side, it's actually a little bit different, where you hold the button down and that defends, and you have like a shield meter that drains. And I believe the further your shield meter drains, kind of the more damage you take during that defensive phase. But kind of an interesting aspect of this is that, as far as I could tell, if you do a perfect block, it doesn't seem like your character can die. You will always have kind of 1 HP if you do a perfect block. But again, that relies on you blocking perfectly. So yeah, it's not a guarantee. And I spent much of this game letting all my characters die because I was not particularly good at the perfect timing. And in another kind of additional mechanic on top of this is there's a tension meter, which is a typical thing for Dragon Quest series, where essentially after a certain amount of time in combat, a character gets a special move. And in this case, you basically just kind of like tilt the card, or you like kind of wiggle the cards a little bit, and that sends them into a special move scenario. And if you get all 3 characters in a special move at once, you get like some additional bonus damage. But each character has their own little quick time event that the player needs to do, whether it be making sure you hit a button at the max part of a meter, put in a certain button combination for certain characters. Usually the magic casters, I feel like you kind of have a button combo thing rather than just, hitting a meter at max. So the battle system feels maybe closer to like a Mario RPG in terms of the fact that it just feels very active. And if you want something to be, something to do in combat that isn't just, strategizing, this game actually has quite a bit there in terms of like, interactivity that you do, although it is kind of straightforward for the most part, of smacking the button a bunch and then timing a button press. So since you get a card at the start of each session, your performance doesn't really matter on whether or not you get a better character on your next play. So every time you put 100 yen in, you basically get a card almost immediately at that point. And so whether you improve or not will be completely random. Obviously, though, a standard cards, these are not like customized cards per se. They are cards you can trade, so also there's the potential that you could trade with other players to improve your arsenal of cards, basically. But what's really important, and I think kind of essential to this game, is getting what I think is called like an adventure set, or adventure book set, maybe. I don't know what the actual Japanese word is for it, but essentially this is a save data card specific to Dragon Quest Xross Blade. And what this card lets you do is it lets you create your own custom character. And that character, while it will default as like kind of a warrior class, you can switch them between different classes. You can change their equipment. The drops in the missions will go towards upgrading the equipment this character has. And you can also like customize the look of the character too, although it seems a bit more limited. And as you kind of level up to your class, as you get higher and higher levels, beyond just stat bonuses, you also get different various like other like additional bonuses. It's always hard for me to tell in these kind of Dragon Quest games. There's a similar system in Dragon Quest Champions, the Battle Royale game I played, but I have not played that many like mainline Dragon Quest games, so I don't know if this comes out of that or not. But as you level the class, like each class has like special abilities you gain at certain class levels, essentially. So unfortunately, being unable to read Japanese, I did not really know what those bonuses were, but I assume they were only good for me, so. But the enemy cards themselves that you get, the one card you get when you put 100 yen in and they come out, is static. So while your card evolves and your character evolves, the cards you get on the side are static cards, and you really kind of want to, find cards that are going to pair with your main character well. So you can get various like healers, attack damage dealers. I think there might be some tanks and stuff like that as well. These adventure set cards are a little bit of a pain to get, as far as I can tell. I actually had to go up to an arcade clerk and basically show them a picture and ask them if they had it. It was about 700 yen, so it's pretty cheap. But I did find one arcade that offered them. On the actual website, they'll tell you whether or not they offer these sets or not too. But if you just want to try the game out, I did not see this as a common thing, but there seem to be some locations that have trial cards. And these trial cards are basically kind of stuck on a wall with little like paper sleeves or paper cards you can pull off. However, what's interesting about these is I think they maybe only have like 30 saves available to it. I don't know how Yeah, I don't read Japanese, so I don't know for sure. But what I mean by that, by 30 saves, isn't like you can have 30 characters. I think it means you can only write to the card 30 times. And a friend of mine also mentioned the fact that, like, with the main cards themselves also have like a 400 write limit possibly as well, based off the text on the card. But, that would mean you're spending, $300 to $400 on playing the game. So you have to be a pretty extreme Dragon Quest Crossblade player, I think, to really hit that cap. But for the trial card, 30 saves seemed like something you'd hit pretty quickly. I definitely would have blown past that in the time I spent in Japan playing it over the course of a week. So, but I only ever found it at like a supermarket, so I don't really think they're super commonly around. Or I don't know if you can transfer these data between different cards so you can get a fresh card with like the ability to save more or something like that. But these cards are really important because they let you do progression. So there's story modes, tournament modes, dungeon modes, and these all kind of act as structure. For the story, you can kind of play that across multiple sessions and you get little cutscenes and things like that. The cutscenes I wouldn't say were particularly great. I mean, I could not read the story, and I don't have any context for the Adventure of Dai at all. But the cutscenes all seem pretty low budget, although the story mode I did make an attempt at like making a more cinematic sequence. But I don't really know if it's like a satisfying experience as somebody who doesn't read Japanese, but it at least gives you kind of like a checklist of things to go through. But with the game being at like the 5th season of content, there's quite a bit of story content now. So unless you're doing like a long stay in Japan and you're really going hard on Dragon Quest Dai, I think it's probably likely you won't be able to finish all the story within that time. But the tournament mode is a bit more of a, I guess you could say, mode that's like if you're going to spend a lot of time at the arcade. So essentially what that means is like when you sit down to play tournament mode, essentially it's like I think 5 battles you go through. And you go through a list of battles and you do them all in that one session. So it's not like, I don't think you can save progress during these tournament ones. Maybe, possibly you can, but at least in my experience, I didn't like ever walk away from the machine and then come back and try to play again and restart a tournament. And it seems like you want to kind of keep putting your money in for each of these rounds because I don't think winning lets you progress into the tournament. You have to pay for each round of the tournament. So you're not really like saving money or anything, but I assume it's like, better drops and things like that they can use for your character and stuff like that. And then the dungeon mode is something that seemed to be maybe based around your custom character in the progression using the adventure book set. But unfortunately, I didn't really get to play that much. And when I did try to play it, I got my butt kicked really hard and I really couldn't find a way to approach it that like made a lot of sense. And so, as somebody who can't read Japanese, this might be expected, but I just had a really hard time finding like good guidance on what I should be doing in that game. So I think just kind of sticking to the story mode, while at times can feel a little too easy, I think would probably be the most satisfying experience if you're going to spend, a week or two playing this game while you're in Japan. So, as an RPG, I'm going to say that I couldn't really understand the finer details of what was going on due to the language barrier and the fact that, like, I just haven't really spent a lot of time with Dragon Quest. So, like, some of the things that I probably should be able to kind of, like, assume based off, the English releases of Dragon Quest, I couldn't really do because I've only played a handful of Dragon Quest games, and most of them are kind of the spin-off titles that don't rely so much on the RPG mechanics and things like that. But if you are looking for a game where you can kind of like build a character, customize them a bit, switch out equipment, grind, and things like that, I think this is like a really cool game in that regard. And I definitely think it's something that you can, have fun with if you want to. I think the positioning mechanic, while not necessarily like anything crazy, is a fun, neat little thing, as each character has their own like kind of different puzzle you got to fit into. And each battle is a little bit different because the enemy position changes and things like that as well. So I think that's really cool. I will say though that like kind of the low ranking cards, as far as I could tell, kind of became obsolete pretty early on, at least when playing through easy mode. Each mission has easy, normal, or hard mode. But maybe later on, if you get harder or get into the game on like harder levels, maybe things like card race or card stats or specific moves matter more than like the raw strength of a card. But I largely stuck to putting on cards on the field that I felt were just the best cards I have in terms of raw power, and that was more than enough for the easier story content if you're just walking through there. But maybe there's like a level of kind of like harder strategy you can have later on, that where you can kind of switch out cards that for each fight and try to make the best choices based off what the enemies are. But for my experience, I just really couldn't get to that point, unfortunately, just due to my limited time, my limited Japanese ability, and really just kind of going in blind. But yeah, if you want to see what like an RPG arcade game can look like, and get some cool like card souvenirs along the way with that, I definitely kind of recommend checking out Dragon Quest Cross Blades. I think it's really cool, and I definitely think it's worth your time. And though if you are just gonna skip the adventure book set, I feel like the value of playing the game kind of drops significantly. So